In this video, we're going to take a closer look at the first family in Egypt and its link to the first dynasty in Egypt. We'll also look at the events leading up to the first dynasty. We're going to begin with the first man named Geb. He had the Egyptian title Urpat, which means chief of the human family. He corresponds to the biblical first man Adam, who was also the chief of the human family. So Geb and Adam are the same man. Nut was the wife of Geb. She was called the Mighty Mother. She was the first to give birth to a human child. Before that, no human child had ever been born. She herself was never born. Egyptian details of creation say that Shu forcibly separated Nut from the embrace of Geb. We all know that an embrace brings two people chest to chest, and rib bones are in the chest. So when we compare this to the Bible, we see that separating Nut from the embrace of Geb is like taking Eve from the rib of Adam. So Nut and Eve are the same woman. Once separated, Shu lifted Nut above Geb, who was the earth, to form the sky. And we all know that Geb, or Adam, was created by God from the dust of the earth. Osiris was the firstborn son of the womb of Nut, engendered by Geb the ancestor. The firstborn son of Adam and Eve was Cain. Looking at these two firstborn sons, Cain and Osiris, the Bible says Cain was a tiller of the ground. The Egyptian story says Osiris was the first to bring agriculture to Egypt. They are both the same man. The birth name for Osiris was Kensu, which comes from the root word kens, meaning to travel, move about, and to run. In Genesis 4, verse 12, God calls Cain a fugitive and a vagabond. God drove Cain out of his native land that he cultivated after he killed his brother Abel. So we find that Cain had to travel, move about, and to run from his native land because God drove him away, making him a fugitive and a vagabond. The Egyptian Ken sounds very similar to the biblical Cain, so this is further evidence that Cain and Osiris are the same man. Horus the elder is the second-born son of Geb and Nut. The second-born son of Adam and Eve was Abel. The Bible says that Abel was killed young in life by his brother Cain. The Egyptian story says Horus died young in life, but no reason was given for his death. The Bible also says Abel was a righteous man. The Egyptian story says that Horus the elder had the attributes of the great cosmic moral creator God. So Abel and Horus were the same righteous man. Nut also had a son named Atem, the dead sun god. Atem was the first man among Egyptians who was believed to have become divine and who was at his death identified with the setting sun. This indicates that he was the first man to die in the Egyptian records. In the biblical record, the first man to die was Abel, the second-born son of Adam and Eve. This is evidence that Horus the elder, Atem, and Abel are all the same man. They were all the first to die. Horus the elder was his Egyptian name while he was alive. Atem became his Egyptian name after he died. Atem was the first living man god known to the Egyptians. The third-born sons in these two stories are Seth of the Bible and Seth of the Egyptian story. They are both the same man with the same name. Seth was originally considered as an equal to his brother Horus the elder. Around 3721 BC, Seth killed his older brother Osiris, who was Cain, and this changed how Egyptians viewed Seth. Seth is described as having red skin and red hair, and it is said that animals with red or reddish-brown hair or skins, and even red-haired men, were supposed to be especially under the influence of Seth. Back at that early period, Egyptians gave ignominious treatment to those people who had redness of complexion, because it was imagined that they bore resemblance to Seth. There seems to be some inconsistency in people's attitude towards Seth. On the one hand, he did murder his older brother, but on the other hand, he was a son of the first man Geb, or Adam. And since Osiris had already killed his brother Horus the elder, and now Seth killed his brother Osiris, that means the first two sons of Geb were dead. That left the third son, Seth, as the oldest living son of Geb. There was obviously a great deal of importance in being the oldest living son of Geb, the first man. It has been suggested that Seth killed his older brother Osiris because Osiris had a marital relationship with Seth's wife, and from that union came a son named Anubis. Isis was the eldest daughter of Geb and Nut. She was born at the city Dendera, a city called the home of the children of Geb. Priests at Dendera claim that Nut made her home there. Isis married her brother Osiris and bore a son named Baba. When Seth killed Osiris, he tore the body into 14 pieces. When Isis found the body of her husband, she brought the pieces back together again. Nebertcher was the name of Osiris when his scattered limbs had been brought together and built up again into a body by Isis and Nephthys. Isis is called Greater Cherti because she built up Nebertcher. Nephthys is called Lesser Cherti because she built up Nebertcher under Isis' leadership. It was at this time that Osiris was reportedly revived by Isis and fathered a child by Isis. That child was Horus the Younger, son of Isis. Osiris is not the actual father of Horus the Younger, and we'll see who that father was later. Senet-Nofret was the second daughter of Geb and Nut. She married her brother Horus the Elder, second son of Geb and Nut. She was called the Good Sister, and her character matches that of her husband Horus, or Abel, whom God called righteous. She bore him a son named Panabtaui, who became the lord of the double country. Nephthys was the third daughter of Geb and Nut. She was born in Upper Egypt at Shechem. Her name comes from Nubbed Het, which means house of Seth. She married her brother Seth and became a part of his house or family. She was probably the mother of Enos, the son of Seth in the Bible. The Bible says Enos was born when Adam was 235 years old. That translates to 3749 BC. The death of Horus the Elder marked the first death among all mankind. But Geb, or Adam, remembered the words of the serpent in Genesis 3, verse 4, while in the Garden of Eden. When talking about eating the fruit of a certain tree, the serpent said, "You shall not surely die," which is what God said they would do. But we know that God was talking about the second death mentioned in Revelation 20, verse 14. However, Geb must have thought about those words and probably conceived an idea that his son was not dead, but living in an afterlife somewhere. Geb decided to be his son's protector in the afterlife and came up with the title Kenti Amenti, which means ruler of the underworld, where his son was. He also came up with the white crown as a symbol of his underworld rulership. That happened sometime before Seth was born, before 130 a.m. or 3854 B.C. About 100 years later, in 3749 B.C., when Enos was born, men began to call themselves gods. That's what Genesis 4:26 says. Read Adam Clarke's commentary for the correct translation. Since the Egyptians claimed that Atem was the first man-god, his worship must have begun in 3749 B.C. when Enos was born. Atem was Horus the Elder of Egypt and Abel of the Bible. Atem, Horus, and Abel are three names for the same man who died about 100 years earlier, just before Seth was born in 3854 B.C. Atem was the first man-god known to the Egyptians. He was the setting sun, or the dead sun god. Ra was the noonday sun at full strength. He was the sun god Ra. Ra and Geb are both called the father of Osiris. So Geb, the first man, Adam, became the sun god Ra sometime shortly after 3749 B.C., when Atem began to be worshipped as the first man god in Egypt. Ra was the sun at full strength. Atem was the setting sun as it died in the evening. Earlier we saw that Osiris was not the father of Horus the Younger, even though Horus claimed Osiris was his father. This is supported by Seth's claim that Horus the Younger was illegitimate. The actual father of Horus the Younger was Geb, who became the sun god Ra. Isis became the first royal wife of Ra when he was elevated to god status. She was called the goddess Ra Ta'uit, female counterpart of Ra. She was the mother of Horus the Younger, who was also called Mighty in the house of Geb. Khenti Amenti was Geb, the ruler of the underworld where the dead resided in the afterlife. The white crown was originally the crown of Khenti Amenti. As time passed, Geb came to be called ruler of the world and the protector. The white crown came to symbolize his new title. When Geb was elevated to the god status of Ra the sun god in 3749 BC, he gave his earthly throne to his firstborn son Osiris. Osiris ruled 28 years and was killed by his brother Seth around 3721 BC. His death left the throne of Egypt empty. Horus the Younger claimed Osiris was his father, making Horus the rightful heir to the throne. Seth claimed Horus was illegitimate, and since Seth was the oldest living son of Geb, he should be the rightful heir to the throne. A battle erupted between Horus and Seth, and Geb had to make an early judgment giving Upper Egypt to Seth and Lower Egypt to Horus the Younger. This division of Egypt occurred around 3721 BC after Osiris was killed. The Egyptian story says Horus and Seth fought 3 times. The first was in 3721 BC. The second was in the year 363 of the reign of Ra, or Geb. Geb began his reign over the world around 80 years after he was put on the earth. His world-ruling rank was established by Atem. It was ordered by decree in the library and recorded on a tablet according to the command of Ta-Tanan. The year 363 of his reign would be around 3541 BC. The second battle that occurred at this time brought back the unification of Egypt under Horus the Younger. The third battle between Horus and Seth was in the year 400 of the reign of Ra, or Geb. That translates to about 3504 BC. This time Seth divided Egypt again. From 3504 BC until the unification of Egypt during Dynasty I in 3283 BC, wars raged between the two kingdoms. The priesthood at Abydos was ruling at the time. The cult of Anhur, which is Horus the Elder, was supreme at Abydos. Panabtawi, son of Horus and lord of the double country, was the likely ruler of Abydos as chief priest of his father's cult. Around 3300 BC, just prior to Dynasty I, King Scorpion and King Narmer began battles to unify Egypt under a king. Narmer's son, Menes, threw out the cult of Anhur from Abydos and replaced it with the cult of Osiris. Even though the Narmer palette shows Narmer wearing the white crown and the red crown, the single act of establishing the cult of Osiris in Egypt is the main reason Egyptians credit Menes as the first pharaoh of Dynasty I. Isis actually married her own son, Horus the Younger, and bore Neith from that relationship. Neith married King Narmer, the son of King Scorpion and Queen Shesh I. The son of King Narmer and Queen Neith was Menes, the first pharaoh of Dynasty I. Dynasty I and II were all the same family, so what event marks the division of the two dynasties? Look at the lifespan of Adam, or Geb. He died being 930 years old. By my calculations, Dynasty I ended 932 years after Adam, or Geb, was put on the earth. The death of the great first man, Adam, marks the end of an era. It begins a whole new era in world history among these early people on earth. His death may be the single event that divides Dynasty I from Dynasty II.